Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Dietrich.
And I am going to share so much about myself.
I can't wait.
In the episode right after this. Yeah, I was joking. I'm not actually. Nobody really wants a TMI start to the episode from me. So
I don't know. I kind of do.
Yeah. No, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
I'll share something about you.
Oh, God. Okay.
It's actually good. You take really great photographs. You do.
Thank you. Thank
really
you.
Really
good. And by that, you mean I use my camera well, not the photographs of me are very good. Just to be clear for those of you in listener land. Yes. The photos of me are miserable. But I have gotten semi-decent, I think.
You're more than semi-decent. It's pretty impressive. Thank you.
I've in the pandemic, I've had more time to spend out there doing photography and particularly sports photography. It's the one excuse I have to get out of the house in a safe-ish fashion. So.
Well, they're very good, and I very much enjoy seeing them.
Thank you. I appreciate it. But that brings us to the actual topic of today's episode, which is how much should we be sharing with employees? And this is something that came up. I mean, it's a question I get periodically from clients anyway, but it was something that was inspired by a Harvard Business Review article that essentially posed the same question and suggested that in order to inspire your team, you need to be willing to share more of yourself. So how much should we share? How do we draw the line? And I'd like to include both personal and business side of things. Let's start with the personal. But I think that how much you share about your business goes hand in hand with this, particularly when you're a small agency and you're the owner.
Yeah, I mean, we build relationships with human beings, right? And in order to build relationships and trust and all those kinds of things that you need to have a great relationship, you have to share parts of yourself. It's not. You can't go into a meeting and be like, okay, I'm going to talk about this and everybody share. Like, we're not robots. You have to actually build trust in being a human being. And you can't do that if you're not sharing about yourself.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I think people overlook the fact that, whether you're doing business development or employee relations, it's about the people.
Yeah.
Right? It's not. Nobody works for your agency as a business. They work for you as the owner. They work for their line manager. Clients hire you. They don't hire the logo, right? You don't work with the logo, right? I mean, you may work for Apple, but the client is whoever you're working with there, and that's ultimately what drives the relationship. So you have to remember that as a starting point. So I think that's a great point.
So I have recently, I joke that I've taken a part-time job. It's not really a part-time job. I've stepped in to help a client after their VP of marketing resigned. And I've had to build trust really fast with the team, very, very fast. I worked with them, as an agency, and we've worked with them as an agency, but I had, because I am stepping in as this role for now. They have a dotted line to me. And so one of the things that I started doing with them is, many of them are young in their careers and they haven't had any experience presenting. And I've noticed that in larger meetings with the bigger company, people are often called on sporadically and spontaneously without any warning. And it makes younger professionals very nervous. So one of the things I've started doing is I'm giving them a topic based on their passion. Like, one woman makes phenomenal cheese boards. Another one is running the New York Marathon. So there's all these things that they're doing outside of work. And I'm having them give a 5-minute presentation at the start of our marketing meetings, just to get them accustomed to presenting to a group of people. But I'm doing it in a way that it allows them to share things about themselves that the rest of the team didn't know. And it's working really well. It's actually, it came up because I was joking that Addie woke me up in the middle of the night like 3 weeks ago and was like, Mom, how are pencils made? And I was like, I don't know. It's 3:00 in the morning. Go back to bed. And so I was relaying that story, and they were like, well, how are pencils made? And so I created a presentation to show them how pencils are made. And then I said, well, wait a sec. This is a really, I started to notice they were getting very nervous when spontaneously called upon. And so we've started doing that. So it's kind of a fun way to be able to engage people in what they're passionate about, but also give them some professional development.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And there are a lot of ways that you can make connections with your team members by having these kinds of conversations. Now, you have to be careful because you want to make sure that you're not asking questions of your employees of a personal nature, right? So they should be volunteering things. And you also have to keep an eye out because sometimes these conversations can make people uncomfortable, right? So you need to get to know your team, again, as people and figure out, where those lines are because, what you're comfortable talking about may not be what someone else is either comfortable talking about or comfortable hearing. So you need to gauge those things and continue to make adjustments.
So the HBR article talked about a couple of things. Cultivate your top 3 stories about failure. I love that because it shows that everybody makes mistakes or as Bob Ross would say, accidents are happy mistakes, something like that. Incorporate.
Well, let's stop on that one there because I think that overall, agency owners are afraid to talk about failure. They're afraid to talk about it with each other, with their teams. Everybody always assumes that, that other agency, they're always successful. I see them doing all these great things. Well, yeah, because people publicize their success. They generally don't run. It's the same thing. People talk about, well, I see all these great things on Facebook, but nobody ever shares the bad stuff. Well, yeah, of course, because that's human nature.
Right.
Right. You have people who will post on Facebook, I lost 100 pounds. You don't have people say, I gained 10 pounds. Right. That's usually not what you see. And but I do think that the more comfortable you get in sharing your failures with anyone, it's benefit. There are more lessons to be had out of failure than anything else.
100%.
And I always say that my role as an agency consultant or coach is that, really the vast majority of what I do is just tell you what I did wrong in the past so that you don't repeat the same mistake.
It's true. Like that there is definitely value in failure. There's definitely value in experience too. So, we were talking offline last week about the gigantic mistake I made before the Great Recession because I came out of a large agency and I thought that I had to take a line of credit and borrow some money to be able to build my team to be able to go and get new business. And all of a sudden the economy, the bottom drops out and I have all of this debt and I can't pay my people because we don't have any clients. And it was astronomical. Like I didn't know. I didn't know you weren't supposed to do those things. Now I do. It was a very hard lesson to learn, right? But I talk about that kind of stuff. Like $400,000 in debt is not successful. That is not the definition of success.
Not generally. Yeah, that's generally not where you want to go with that. No. So by all means, share those things with your team, particularly the professional failures, because those are things that they can directly learn from. So, if you say, hey, I screwed up a pitch once by doing this. One of the stories that I always tell is that, I thought that I could ride a negative story into a positive one. Yeah, not generally the best idea. But I thought, because I was young in my career, I was probably 23, 24. And so I thought I had found just the angle to pick up on some bad news, not about my organization, but sort of a macro story. And I could ride that into, that's bad news, but yeah, that doesn't play.
That's not a good idea.
No, particularly because during that news cycle, the news got worse. So that press release looked really stupid by the end of the day. Which my boss very helpfully pointed out to me.
That's awesome. That's a great boss. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Incorporate vulnerability in real time.
I think that is good up to a point.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that and as a leader, as an owner, as a manager, you need to help people understand that you're human, that you make mistakes, that you have vulnerability. You can't go too far with it, though, because they have to still have confidence in you. So this is one where I think you really need to walk a tightrope so that you are showing just enough leg, but not too much. It's an old-fashioned expression.
Analogy.
All right, it's an old-fashioned expression. My apologies. Now my show's going to get canceled.
Oh, okay. Share what's top of mind for you.
Yeah.
What's top of mind for you, Chip?
So sometimes what's top of mind you shouldn't share, apparently. So sometimes it's good to take a beat and say, okay, should this old-fashioned expression be used or not? Answer: no.
No.
Don't do it. Look, yeah. So, but I think that it is, one of the things that is valuable when you're talking with your team in particular is sharing what's on your mind and what are your current concerns. What do you see as the opportunities? Again, balancing it out. You don't want people to panic, but look, if you're sitting here and saying, okay, it's March of 2020 and you're trying to figure out what the economic impact of these shutdowns and such are going to be, that's a conversation you should have with your team, because your team is going to assume that you're worried about this stuff anyway. Right. And so if they're going to assume it, it's better to take those assumptions out and share what you're actually thinking, because more often than not, when you're silent on things like that, they fill the void with much more extreme potential outcomes. Yep. And this is both for good and bad, right? So if things look like they're good, they're going to assume that they're even better than they really are, right? Most of your employees, if you actually surveyed them and asked them how much they thought you were making, I bet you that they would all bet you were making more than you are.
Way more.
Right?
Like,
I mean, that's certainly been my experience.
More. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they think you're taking it all home and not sharing it, for sure.
Right. And so, that sort of segues into the business side of the equation when it comes to transparency. Look, I don't necessarily think you should share all of the financials, but you need to share a sense of the financial direction of the business, and you need to help the team understand how performance is. Because if you don't have that level of transparency, honesty, vulnerability, then you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're not allowing your team to help as much as they could.
The pandemic is a great example of that, because I remember my husband coming home right before the holidays in 2019 from a trip. And he said to me, we were in the kitchen, I was making dinner, and he said, I think we should be worried about this virus. And I was like, what are you talking about? Why should we be worried? He's like, I don't know. There's just something about it that people in my circles are talking about. We should be worried about it. And so after the holidays, of course, it got more intense by mid-January. And I said to my team, we don't know what's going to happen. This is what's happening in other parts of the country. We should watch this. And I remember Martin Waxman saying at the time, I think we'll be okay unless South by Southwest cancels. If South by Southwest cancels, then we have to go into plan C, essentially. And then South by Southwest cancels.
Right. Along with everything else on the planet.
Yeah.
So
I remember having that conversation with the team, figuring out what our plans A, B, and C were, and we knew that plan C was the trigger for that was if South by canceled, and then they did.
Yeah. And those are conversations that if you're playing everything close to the vest and you're not sharing with your team, you're not going to get that kind of input.
Right.
And so you're now guessing on your own and that sort of thing. And a lot of agency owners, particularly when they're in stressful situations, will often turtle and not share. But it's, again, you've got to do it with the right balance, because you don't want to freak the team out. But you've got to be willing to share that kind of information and frankly, your feelings about it. I'm not a big feelings guy, but you should be sharing, your perspective. Let's call it that. I feel more comfortable calling it perspective.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, a great lesson for me was the Great Recession, because I did turtle. I took it all internal. And when I had to lay everybody off, which sucked and was the worst part of my career by far, I remember one of my young employees said to me, you should have let us in. We could have helped you find an answer. And I was like, no, I feel even worse. But she was right. That was a really good lesson for me. She was right.
Right. So, I mean, let's veer back to the personal side, though, because I'm curious your take on this. I mean, when it comes to the owner's personal life, and I don't necessarily mean, who you're dating or how your marriage is going or that kind of stuff, but how much on the personal side of things do you think it's appropriate to share with the team?
I think there's a line with it, just like there is with vulnerability, right? I mean, I think we are all much more comfortable with sharing parts of our personal life after the shutdown and having kids at home and all that kind of stuff. Like, we were joking the other day that Addie literally came to every one of my meetings for a year. And it was very stressful for me, very stressful. But that isn't something normally I would have shared. I wouldn't have shared a hamster on my head or crawling down my face, but it happened.
And I really wish you hadn't. So you didn't draw the line in the right place there. I didn't. That's something I did not need to see.
And it happens still, but it's after school, so you don't get to see it anymore. But
thank God.
Yeah, I know. I agree. So I do think there's a line. I think the line has moved, probably for the better in the last 20 months. But I think that it's the same thing with vulnerability. You just have to be really careful about what you're sharing. Like, we had a client who reduced everybody's salary and then showed up in a brand new Tesla to work. And we were like, you can't do that.
Right. Yeah.
That's stupid. Don't do that. So
yeah, that's not smart
things you have to think about from that perspective as well.
Yeah. And I do think it is something that's evolving. It'll be interesting to see, how it continues to evolve. Are some of these temporary changes that will go back? I don't know. I do know. I mean, I've always been open, for example, about the fact that I've had an irregular heartbeat for decades, and I've had a couple of heart surgeries for it and that kind of stuff. And so, in each instance where I've had that surgery, I've been public about it. I mean, because I figured, I'm going to disappear for at least a few days, if not a little bit longer, depending on how things go. I don't want people to speculate. And so I always shared with my team and clients those kinds of things. I will say that the first time I had that in the, around 2008, I think was when I had the first one, I actually lost business as a result of it, because there were clients who didn't want to work with me as a result. Because
the fact that you had to have heart surgery?
Yeah.
What? So they didn't have hearts, is what you're telling me?
Well, they were concerned about my ability to keep up in the wake of that. And so I know for a fact that I lost some sizable business because of it. Not business that I already had. I didn't have anybody leave, but there was prospective business on the table when it came up that I know I lost because of it. So you do have to think about how will others perceive things and make sure that, you're sharing. And so, one of the lessons I learned was that I needed to be perhaps even more transparent than I was, right? And talk about, okay, well, this is what it means and this is how it, transpires afterwards and all that kind of stuff. And you're basically back to normal in a relatively shorter, because it's not open heart surgery or something like that, where you're out for a couple of months. And so being clear about those kinds of things, but you do need to think through, okay, if I share this, where does it go? What are the questions that are going to be asked? What concerns might people have? And make sure that you're being thoughtful about it. So I certainly, it hasn't made me not want to disclose stuff, but it certainly makes me more thoughtful about, how, when, and why I do it.
For sure. I think that makes a lot of sense. I also think it's really crappy that you would lose business over that, but
I think they thought they were being helpful. I honestly think that they thought that they were doing the right thing.
Huh.
But
okay.
But I think it's. I think when you share things, with your team, you share what your ambition is, right? Help them understand where you want to take the business. Yep. Help them understand what you want to do. I mean, if you're, for example, as a lot of my clients are, trying to figure out how to get themselves out of some of the day-to-day so they can work on growing the business, tell your team that. Don't make it a secret. Yep. Tell them, I'm trying to find ways to, and they may have their own ideas about how you can do it. They may have some helpful advice and useful suggestions, or they may be willing to step up to the plate and say, hey, boss, I got it.
Yeah.
you don't need to deal with this.
Yeah.
And so you don't, if your plans are secret and you're trying to execute them on your own, it's going to be much tougher to do than if you've got your whole team rowing in the same direction with you.
Yeah, and then the last one is study inspiring stories from others, which I personally love that. That's one of my favorite tips.
Yeah, I mean, you can learn a lot from other people. I mean, again, going back to what we said earlier, remember, you're only seeing the good stuff.
Right.
Right? It's not, you're seeing, when you see someone have success, you're not necessarily seeing all the failures that happened leading up to it, right? You see the entrepreneur who sells for $1 billion.
Right.
You're not seeing all of the missteps along the way, all of the stress that that came along with getting there. Maybe the failed attempts at businesses before that, right? Sometimes that gets written about, but more often than not, it gets glossed over.
Yep.
So absolutely take inspiration from what you're seeing from other people, but remember it probably wasn't a straight line to that success. And so don't judge yourself harshly if you have your own hiccups along the way.
Yeah, that was a very hard lesson for me to learn early on, because I would read Inc. and Fast Company and HBR, and I'd be like, wow, these people are really doing it. And I had that keeping up with the Joneses mentality of, oh, I have to do that. And what I didn't realize was there were all those peaks and valleys.
Can I just say, I hate the Inc. 5000 list.
It's pay for play.
Not only that, but it creates this impression that you should be growing your business at these astronomical rates.
Right.
You shouldn't.
Yes.
Right. I mean, when I go into an agency and I see that they've grown, 500% in a year, I don't see that as a success necessarily. I see that as maybe it's good news. There's a lot of problems that come with growing that fast too, though. So and certainly it shouldn't be your target to grow by those kinds of percentages year after year after year, because it's not sustainable, in a way that gives you what you want as the owner. So, right. Be careful about some of this stuff. And I mean, I think the keeping up with the Joneses is a great expression. It's probably offensive to people not named Jones, though. So I don't know.
Or name Jones, maybe. Or
name Jones. Good point. Yeah. Good point. Because that implies that all Joneses are successful, and if you're a Jones and you're not successful, then what? Whew, wow, that is tough.
Well, we've really done it on this podcast episode.
We have gone around the bend and over the cliff. So
yeah.
I think on that note, we probably ought to draw this episode to a close before I get into even more trouble than I've already done in the last 22 minutes. Hopefully I have not offended you too deeply, and you will tune in again next week. In the meantime, this has been the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Jenny Dietrich.
And it depends. Thank you for listening to the Agency Leadership Podcast. You can watch or listen to every episode by visiting agencyleadershippodcast.com. The Agency Leadership Podcast is distributed on the FIR Podcast Network. Just visit www.firpodcastnetwork.com. We welcome your feedback and suggestions and look forward to being back with you again next week.